Okay, today I'm going to talk about how energy flows through an ecosystem. I have a very old, well, not very old, but like at least 6 or 7 years old, a food web that was drawn by Catalia when she was in grade 11. I think she was EP, I don't know, 9, 10, 11, something like that. I can't remember. Anyway, so I do try to use some of the stuff that you guys do in my presentation. So that's an example of a food web, which is something I'll talk about a little later. All organisms need energy to carry out all of the essential functions of life, like growth, movement, maintenance, and repair and reproduction. In an ecosystem, energy flows from the sun to autotrophs, then to the organisms that eat the autotrophs, and then to the others. The amount of energy an ecosystem receives and the amount that are transferred from organism to organism have an important effect on an ecosystem's structure. So first thing I want to talk about are the kinds of, or like how we classify organisms, according to how they obtain energy. And these are terms that you might have heard before. So we have the producers. These consist of autotrophs. Oh, all right, hold on. Wait, come on. Oh, because I minimized it. Did I? Wait. Oh my God. Oh, goodness. Hold on, I gotta minimize that window. Okay. So classifying organisms according to how they get energy and how they utilize energy, we have producers and consumers. So producers are made of autotrophs, or producers are the autotrophs. Autotroph means that they make their own food. And they're also called producers because they basically produce the organic compounds that will provide energy for everything else in the environment. Most producers are photosynthetic, which of course means that they use solar energy to make food, but also some are chemosynthetic, or they use chemosynthesis, which is using inorganic molecules to produce carbohydrates. This is going to be your very, very deep water producers, like at the bottom of the ocean where there is no sunlight. Obviously, if there's no sunlight, they can't use photosynthesis. So they have evolved to use chemosynthesis. And if I were to ask you which evolved first, chemosynthesis or photosynthesis, what do you think your answer would be? What do you think evolved first? Any ideas? Yeah, correct. Chemosynthesis would have evolved first because, as we know, life evolved from the ocean, and photosynthetic organisms didn't evolve until much later when we had plants that started developing on the land. Because remember what Earth was like when it was first formed? It was just like this giant ball of magma. And then like once the land started cooling down, we still had extremely active volcanoes all over the planet. And we didn't even have like clouds or an atmosphere yet. And so it was only once the planet started cooling down and the water in the water and the carbon dioxide that were hold on. Okay. The water and the carbon dioxide that were in the air finally condensed. And when it precipitated, that means that that's when all of the oceans and bodies of water were formed. So chemosynthesis would have started first. And then once the land cooled down enough and you had plants started growing on the land, moving from the ocean to land, then you would have photosynthesis. In terrestrial ecosystems, plants are the major producers, especially in places like the Amazon or other rainforests. I mean, we have rainforests here in Thailand. These are the most productive areas of the planet. And in aquatic ecosystems, the photosynthetic producers are going to be protists and bacteria. Remember, protists are the kingdom that basically I always refer to as like the leftovers, the organisms that don't fit into the other 5 kingdoms, the eubacteria, archaebacteria, plant, animal, or fungus. If you're not one of those 5, they basically throw you into protista. All right, so that what you're looking at there is giant sea kelp. And I do believe this isn't even a plant. It is a protist, even though it looks like plant. So kelp is, if I'm not mistaken, it's a colonial organism. All right, and then we have consumers. All animals, most protists, all fungi, and a lot of bacteria are heterotrophs. Heterotroph meaning they cannot make their own food. So they get energy by either eating or absorbing organic material from other organisms. So why I say you can't say eating is because bacteria don't eat necessarily. Fungi don't eat. You wouldn't call it eating because they don't have, they don't actually ingest or put anything into their body. They basically absorb it. So fungi like mushrooms, they will grow on like dead vegetation. Sometimes even there's certain types of fungus that can invade and grow in organisms and eventually kills them. There's one really interesting species of fungus which infects, let's say there's like 1,000 different species of this particular fungus, and each species of fungus has its own target insect. For example, an ant or a particular moth that they invade, like the animal inhales the spores from the fungus, and then the fungus like literally grows out from inside their body, and they look like a giant little forest of fungus, and obviously it kills the insect. But it's very interesting, that species. I forget what it's called. Okay, so consumers get energy by consuming organic molecules or other organisms, and they are grouped according to what kind of food they eat. And all of this should be very familiar to you. So herbivores are consumers that eat producers and only producers. Carnivores, of course, are meat eaters. That's what carnivore. So vor means consume or to eat, and then carni means meat, herb, obviously plant. So these guys, it's not that they eat meat and whatever, it's that they only eat meat. Omnivores, of which people are most people are omnivores. They eat both plants and animals. Something you might not be familiar with is something called a detritivore. Now, detritus is basically like rotting, like dead and rotting things. So these feed on the garbage of the ecosystem. You've got the earthworm on the right-hand side that literally eats dirt. I mean, literally. I know like a lot of people, especially on social media, they misuse the word literally. Like, I'm literally dying right now. Like, well, you're not actually like in the process of dying. Although I guess each of us is slowly dying every day if you want to get technical about it. But, or like, I'm literally just like, I don't know, when people say that, they don't mean literally, because it's not actually really happening. But earthworms do actually really literally eat dirt, because there's organic material that's in that dirt that they use as nutrition. And then of course, on the left side, you've got the mushrooms there that grow on, like, it looks like a dead log or something. And so it's slowly absorbing the nutrients that are being broken down as the log rots. Then we have the decomposers. Now, the decomposers are kind of similar to, and oftentimes the same as the detritivores, where they're consuming the dead plants and animals. But when we call them decomposers, we're really talking about how they reduce them to simpler forms of matter. And these are like really important class of organisms because they are recycling nutrients back into nature, and they help to break down the dead and rotting corpses of organisms. Whenever one organism eats another, the molecules are metabolized and energy is transferred. So just through the process of cellular respiration, when you eat another organism, you use those molecules as for energy. And as a result, you get energy flow. So it always flows from producers up through the food chain to the consumers. Now, one way to follow the energy flow is to group organisms in an ecosystem on how they get their energy. And when we do this, we're usually referring to just a food chain, which is one straight line of relationships of energy transfer from one organism to another. Excuse me. And then each level we call a trophic level, and this indicates an organism's position in the sequence of energy transfers. So this is an example of what we call an energy pyramid. And in the same way that when you look at a food pyramid, although I don't really know how accurate the food pyramid is anymore because people are always, well, scientists and nutritionists and professionals like that are always kind of reevaluating how we look at food and what kinds of food are really good for us. Because when I was growing up, they always said like your grains are always like the biggest part of your diet, but now I think they're kind of reevaluating and assigning that to something else. I think, I'm not really sure, but anyway, the largest part of the energy transfer is always at the bottom. So that's why this gets the largest base. This is where the producers are, because they're going to need, but everything in the ecosystem needs the producers to be the most abundant form of life, because they have to provide enough energy to support all of the other trophic levels. Then you have your primary consumers, right? Primary meaning first. So these are your herbivores, the herbivores, which are going to consume the producers. Then you have your secondary consumers, which will be your small carnivores. So for example, the snake obviously is not going to eat the cow, anaconda maybe, but it's going to eat the rabbit. And then you've got your tertiary consumer, and you see how small the pyramid is at the top. So we've got the heat energy loss from the system. So you can see based on the pyramid, all of the blue areas are all the heat loss. That's going to play into how much energy is transferred up to each level, which I'll talk about in a second. And then we've got the energy flowing through the system. So you look at how much energy is transferred from one level to the next. If I get rid of all that stuff. So you start here at the bottom with this much energy available. And this is actually not even very accurate, because it turns out that only 10%, that's a horrible color to do. Only 10% of the energy is transferred to each level. So this is actually not really very accurate. It should be more like down here, whatever 10% is. So if you start at 100% here at the primary consumer level, you're down to 10% already. And the secondary consumers are going to get 1%. Is that correct? Oh, my math is not so good. And then the tertiary consumers only get 0.1%. Should be right? Yeah. So this shows you why there has to be so many producers and why there are so few tertiary consumers. This is why we call it an energy pyramid, because it's super small at the top. You can't have a large number of tertiary consumers because there's just not enough energy to support it. So we can, like I said, we can break up energy flows using food chains and food that got cut off, food webs. So a food chain, which you see here in the picture, is a single pathway of feeding relationships among organisms in an ecosystem that results in energy transfer. So basically, you're just going to have a single line of organisms, and you're going to use an arrow to point to the organism that is the consumer. So in this case, you would say the fox eats the rabbit and the rabbit eats the grass. And that's why the arrows go this way, because you're indicating energy flow. So energy flows from the producer to the primary consumer and from the primary consumer to the secondary consumer. But feeding relationships in an ecosystem, like I said from the very beginning of this unit, it's all based on interdependence. So it's more often than not, I would say like 99% of the time, you never really have a single food chain to represent all of the relationships in an ecosystem. You just look at your own diet. You don't just eat one thing and that's it, right? You eat a variety of things. So even if you just draw a human, and you were to draw arrows to you representing all of the things that you eat. I mean, even just thinking of meat, we've got fish, chicken, as long as you're an omnivore, maybe beef, pork, shellfish. Yeah, I can't think of anything else. But there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 examples of just meat, and then never mind vegetables, fruits, grains, and all of the things where that comes from. So just based on this alone, you can't have a food chain represent an entire ecosystem, which is why we use food webs. So again, many consumers eat more than one type of food, only if you're a specialist, right? Going back to what we've studied before, because most animals are maybe not generalists as far as like humans and cockroaches are concerned, but they fall somewhere between a specialist and a generalist. So like say a lion doesn't eat only gazelle, it could eat not white-tailed deer, but whatever are the other like impala and I don't know what else there is there. Buffalo, if there's like a buffalo calf, like a small baby buffalo, whatever's kind of around really. And you have more than one species can feed on one type of organism. So for example, if you take just grass, maybe I should make that green. So looking at even just a producer, everything in the ecosystem that is a primary consumer, the herbivore is going to feed on grass. So even just from grass, you have a whole bunch of arrows pointing outward at all of the organisms that eat grass. All right, here's another, here's a food web done by Dewey. What EP was that? I don't know, was that a 9 or 10, something like that. Anyway, so you see how all of these arrows are pointing to human. I'm not really sure if, well, yeah, the French eat frogs. They do frogs' legs, right? And so you can see based on the food web here, what the top tier consumers would be, because all of the arrows, it has a bunch of arrows going to it. So the human and the tiger would be top tier. All right, so as I said before, about 10% of the total energy consumed in one trophic level is incorporated or added in to the organisms of the next level. So the ability to maintain a constant body temperature, to move and reproduce all require a lot of energy. And it turns out that most of the organisms that are at the top of the energy pyramid are also regulators or warm-blooded animals. So not only do we get the least amount of energy available from the producer level, but we also require the most energy to maintain all of that homeostasis, like the body temperature. So the kinds of organisms that have that will transfer less energy to the next level than those that don't. What that means is if you have regulators, that is warm-blooded animals, that are part of your energy pyramid at a trophic level other than the top. So we've got, let's do 3 of that. So you've got here your producers, and let's say you've got a rabbit here. Now, a rabbit is an herbivore, so it is a primary consumer. However, it's also a regulator. So a lot of the energy that it eats, that it gets from the producer level, is going to be used to maintain this constant body temperature. And so that's where a lot of the energy is lost, because we talk about only a 10% transfer to the next level up. So if you have a snake that eats the rabbit, the snake is a conformer, so it doesn't need a lot of energy, but the rabbit does need a lot of energy. So the snake is not going to get as much energy from the rabbit as, let's say, an eagle gets from the snake. Because I should actually draw it the other way, because the energy gets transferred up. Because a snake is a conformer, it doesn't need all of that energy to maintain a constant body temperature. So it might turn out that the snake actually transfers a bit more energy to the eagle than the rabbit did to the snake. So here's another example. The flower transfers more energy to the caterpillar than the caterpillar transfers to the frog. Now, the caterpillar is also a conformer, but the plant doesn't move, and it doesn't need a whole lot of energy to reproduce because it uses seeds, right? So it doesn't, basically what I'm trying to say is that like the energy requirements of each animal are going to help determine how much energy it transfers up the trophic level to the trophic level above it. So the producers obviously transfer the most energy because they don't move. They have very low energy requirements. They don't have to maintain a body temperature, that kind of thing. And the frog is going to transfer less energy to the snake. And of course, the snake is going to transfer less energy to the owl, mostly because they're all living, moving around animals that reproduce. And so they require more energy than the flower does. The measured values for energy transfer from one trophic level to the next can range anywhere from 20% to less than 1%. So there is quite a big range there, but we say on average, it's about 10% transfer. So you lose 90% of the energy. So the question might be, why is the energy percentage so low? Well, one reason, not all of the producers are going to be eaten. And that's actually a good thing, because if you do have your energy pyramid, sorry, it's not really neat, but if all of these producers transfer 100% of their energy to the next level up, that means that there's 0 producers left, which means then the entire ecosystem collapses because there's no more energy. So just by default, because you have to continue supporting a future ecosystem, you cannot have all of the first level consumed. And the same for every other level. You can't consume the entire level, otherwise you won't have any more energy. Eventually, the ones that escape being eaten are going to die and become food for the decomposers. So again, we're getting into something where you look at the cyclical nature of nature. Yeah. So if they don't get eaten, they die, become food for decomposers, which goes back down to the producer level. The energy in their bodies was not transferred up to the next trophic level. Even when an organism is eaten, some of the molecules cannot be broken down and used. So this mountain lion is going to eat the deer, but it's not going to eat the entire deer. It's not, for example, going to eat the bones. It's not going to eat the fur. It's going to eat the meat only. So you can't get energy out of everything. So that's another reason why energy is lost at each level. Another reason is that each organism needs some of the energy for itself to stay alive. For example, energy used by prey for cellular respiration cannot be used by predators. And finally, no transfer is 100% efficient. So nothing is 100% efficient. So energy being lost is heat, energy being lost from a lack of being eaten, energy being lost just because your entire body isn't able to be used as energy. Right. Now, the low rate of energy transfer explains why you don't have like 12 trophic levels per food chain in like one ecosystem if you're looking at one relationship. I would say 3, maybe 4 trophic levels per food chain, because there's just not enough energy to sustain any more than that. Again, an average of 10% is transferred, so it's not enough to support many levels. So here we go. You got sunlight. We start with sunlight. Even based on sunlight, only 10% is transferred to producers, because you can't capture all of the energy from sunlight, right? You don't have an infinite amount of producers. So it's even worse, because you've got 10% of the energy from sunlight going to the producers, and then the primary consumer level gets 1%, second is 0.1, and you can see going on up. I would like to point out, however, something that's not in the book, but it's interesting to look at, is if you have some kind of toxin at the producer level, as you go up the food chain, it actually increases in percentage or in concentration. It's a horrible arrow, sorry. So let's say your food, your plants are contaminated, and your, oh gosh, I don't know, like your chicken eats the contaminated grass, then you eat the chicken, the concentration of that toxin only becomes more and more concentrated. And I remember, I was just watching something about this. They talked about this exact same thing. When I learned it, it was called biomagnification. I think they give it a different name now, but I like biomagnification because that's just what I remember. And it's like I literally just was watching something like 2 days ago that talked about it. And so that's a big concern, especially when you consider the kind of food that we eat now. And what I mean by that is, like, you have, and maybe not so much in Thailand, but I know like in the US especially, where you've got these really big, huge corporations which buy local farms, or they pay local farmers. And so then, like, instead of having a bunch of small farms giving produce to like local supermarkets, it's done on a massive scale. And this is really what the problem is, that you're creating these, like, say, for example, these giant fields of corn or rice or soybean or whatever it is. And you've got big corporations that pay the farm to only grow that particular crop. But the problem with that is that different crops utilize different nutrients and minerals in the soil. And so way back in the day, when farmers were independent and local, they actually had to do what's called crop rotation. It was something I learned about in social studies when I was like, like many decades ago. But and the reason why they did that, so you had one farm that would grow several different crops, like let's say corn, wheat, and soybean. And each of those plants requires different nutrients from the soil. So if you have, let's say, a big lot, and you say this much is corn, here's my my soybean, because wheat is usually the most, and here's wheat. And let's say corn needs lots of nitrogen, soybeans need lots of phosphate, and wheat needs, I don't know, phosphorus. I'm just making this up. If you don't rotate, that means that this entire area is going to be completely depleted of nitrogen. And this area is going to be depleted of phosphate, and this area is going to be depleted of phosphorus. So that what they used to do was that they would rotate every so many growing seasons, and that way you're not completely depleting the area of one particular nutrient. So what's happening now is you've got these areas of farmland, and I'm just going to speak for the United States because I don't know about Thailand. I don't research enough about agriculture in Thailand to know if this is happening here or not. But you have these huge areas of land, and if you've ever been to the United States, you know just how big it is. Huge areas of land, which are completely unfarmable. there's nothing left. It's like basically desert. We have leached every single nutrient out of the soil. And so then the farms are going to resort to fertilizers. And here's where the toxin part comes in, where I'm getting back to my main point, is that a lot of times they use these artificially produced fertilizers. And we don't necessarily understand the effect of biomagnification when we're using these fertilizers. And there's actually a massive class action lawsuit going on right now in the United States about a company that produced a weed killer called Roundup. That's the brand name. And Roundup contains, oh, was it called glyphosate or glycophosphate, something like that. And this is turning out to being a really big problem. And I can't remember exactly what the effects are, but it's really bad. I think it's like carcinogenic, or it's magnifying cancers. I can't remember. I got to go back and look it up. But many people are now suing this company that produces Roundup because they've been using it in their gardens, of course. And if you use it in your gardens and you eat that food, you are ingesting that toxin. So that's why it's important to make sure that we understand, or try to understand where our food comes from. But unfortunately, out of sheer convenience, most of us just really don't pay attention, and we just go to the store and buy whatever's on the shelf. Okay, I think, yeah, I'm going to leave that for another time.